Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Thursday, January the 25th, and I get to spend this morning with you. So that's a really great thing. We don't have the drama of the four-wheeler behind me this morning or the really loud music. There's a gentleman that works here, and he told me that he'd take care of me this morning. So as they get ready for breakfast and serving people here at the resort, I've managed to find this little corner, and I'm grateful that you have come along with me. It's been it's just been fun to take you wherever I go. I just appreciate the internet for that reason. Yesterday was my aunt Anna's funeral, so I was thinking about her all day, and just recognizing again how precious all of these promises are that we have in these scriptures that enable us to look at life with a different perspective, in a different lens. So we've been in a study in the Gospel of Luke, but before I turn there, for those of you who are nearby to Bethany, on Sunday, January the 28th at 5 p.m., we're going to have a night of worship and praise. Our worship teams from all of our campuses are going to come together, and they've been practicing and rehearsing and just putting together a number of just a great night of worship. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm certain that we're going to fill our sanctuary, and it'll be a great night of praise. We are officially going to turn a corner in this whole study on This is Life, and we're going to begin to do the study in the book called Rooted. And if you need any more information about Rooted, you can find that on our website, bethanychurch.com, and we'll give you all the insight that you need. It'll be a great study. Maybe some of you have some small groups that you're a part of. Be great to be a part of one. And over the next several weeks, we're going to look at some really good spiritual disciplines that are going to help us to discover what this life is really all about. We have been spending the first couple of weeks talking about, making certain that our definition of life isn't just bound by possessions, right? Luke chapter 12 was very pointed when Jesus says that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That person is a fool who might be rich in the things of this world, but not rich towards God. In other words, that our lives are being lived in a way contrary to his will and his purpose. He said that again, only he took a different approach when he said that we're not to worry about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear, right? That he says, look at the birds of the air, your heavenly Father feeds them. Look at the lilies of the field. Even Solomon, King Solomon, with all of his wealth and abundance, was never dressed like one of those. And if God takes care of the grass of the fields, and if he feeds the birds of the air, he says, will he not do that for you? Reminding us again that as the scriptures have disclosed, we have been made in the image of God. We reflect him in the world. When all that was made, you look at Genesis chapter 2, when all that was made, he put us as vice regents alongside of him to subdue this world, to rule over it. And so the argument that Jesus is making is from the lesser to the greater. If he's going to do that for birds and for grass, is he not going to do it for you and me? And then he gets to the punchline, and he's saying, rather than worry about what you're going to put on or what you're going to put in you, he says, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. So this idea of the resources that we enjoy in this world, God says, look, I'm going to provide them for you, but you got to seek after me. And again, then now you're looking back and you recognize, okay, that is this life that he has been promising. I can get so caught up in my environment I can get so caught up in my own ambitions that if I'm not careful, I put God's agenda on the back burner. So this whole series is now took us to Luke chapter 16 about managing life. And this is this whole a really strange kind of parable that Jesus gives, where an unjust steward is actually commended for the way in which he invoked a strategy, but not commended in the sense that we ought to imitate. But God was drawing a distinction, and in this, what was he doing? He was reminding us again that there is this classification of the people of the world and the people of the light, and there's a big difference. And in this differentiation, it all boils down to whom do you follow? Like, what is going to be that driving force? It could be our own, engagement in the world based on our values, right? What we amass for ourselves, or we're allowing the scriptures to reveal to us something of the mind of God, so that we might walk after His ways. And so Jesus is saying the people of the world are very shrewd in the way in which they deal with what? Worldly riches. They are. Yesterday, Sydney and I, we went out for dinner, and there was a table next to us, and there was two couples, and they were talking about their businesses and what was going on, and they were going on and on back and forth, and it was kind of impressive that all of them were as engaged and animated. And I see that all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I hope that would increase and abound, that people would find great value in the work that they do, and that God would bless them because of what they do. Because when you find yourself in a position of blessing that way, now you have resources that you could do much good with. And doesn't He call us to that? That we're to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world, that we're to let our light so shine that men may see our good work and glorify our Father who is in heaven. So when we have resources, man, we find ourselves in a position that now we really are engaging the world in a way that is presenting the love of Jesus in tangible, concrete ways. But Jesus says the people of this world, they become very shrewd in the way in which they're dealing with worldly riches. What He's saying to you and me, though, is that isn't the full definition of life. We also have to be rich in the things towards God. We have to be seeking after Him. So the people of the light need to learn how to be as shrewd with eternal riches, so that they're not consumed by them, they're not owned by them, but they realize that they are stewards of God's resources. That's why in this whole parable that Jesus gives, it was a parable of an unjust steward, right? He was an unjust manager working for the rich man and not really taking care of his rich man's, property. And you saw that, right? In the cavalier way in which he went about his business. And so at one point, when he found out he was being fired because of his poor stewardship, he goes to all of the debtors, and what does he do? He says, "How much does my master owe you?" Well, wouldn't you think that if he was the manager, that he would know all these things? So it just underscores again that he wasn't doing his job. And so when he shortchanged his owner, the owner says that was pretty shrewd of you to look out for yourself here, right? And Jesus then drew that parable saying, yeah, see how the people of the world, they become shrewd in the way in which we're dealing with worldly riches. But people of the light need to learn how to be shrewd when they're dealing with eternal riches. They need to be careful that it doesn't become this predominant drive in their life, and that they remember, just like that unjust steward, we're stewards of the grace and of the resources that God has given to us. So how are we conducting His business? That's the whole issue behind this particular parable. And so when we look at that, we realize then that, yeah, this This is life. That's what Jesus is talking about, and he's giving us a way to manage this life. So I want to pick this up here and kind of draw this all to conclusions, because as you follow along in here, we've already seen that we have to learn to manage God's resources, but with an eternal perspective, because one day it is going to be gone. And one day this life that we have is going to be gone. And he says that in itself ought to make us consciously aware that what Jesus is proposing is that there is a life that is to come after this life. And are we prepared for that? Or we put all our eggs in this one basket and may as well just eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you die? The biblical revelation is that God has created us for eternity. And so we want to be ready on that day in which we meet him. And Jesus says, you come through me. And he says, so you have to learn to use the resources that God's given so that you would be welcomed into eternal dwellings, right? So we manage God's resources with this eternal perspective. We also manage God's resources as faithful stewards. This is not ours. We're managers of God's resources. Think about that. In any moment, a health can turn sideways. A life could be cut short. Look at just what happened with COVID. All the control and everything that we thought we had, all of a sudden, wow, right? Everybody's put back on their heels. What does it take to bring about that kind of catastrophe in a life, in a community, right? In a world? So God's saying, no. Life consists in seemingly small opportunities that we have to discharge these duties, pay attention to the frequent and familiar tasks of every day, because we have to remember that we're going to give an account of the debt that we owe to our master. And in this case, we're going to give an account for this life when you stand before the God who gives it. So we have to learn then that we're managing his resources. And when we do that, now we have to manage those resources in a way that pleases him. And this whole revelation that God has given us in the scriptures about how we are to live our life. You love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. You love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says that basically is the summary of all that God has been asking us. But when you make yourself God, when you make your priorities, the ultimate, you can see how easily you can get off track. So there's one more thing though that we haven't really picked up on in our text yet, and I want you to see this, and that is in verse 13 of Luke chapter 16. So in Luke 16 verse 13, he says this. He says, "No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." I'm going to read that one more time, and I want you to think a little bit more about what Jesus is saying in light of all the things that we have just learned from Luke chapter 16. He says, no servant can serve two masters, right? It's obvious the unjust steward was really serving himself. And he was serving himself in such a way that he made something that was good the ultimate. And he took resources that really weren't his, but he used all of that for his own advantage. Because as you remember in the story, right, he says, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too proud to beg. But Jesus is saying, look, you cannot serve two masters. Either you're going to hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. And then God now begins to, Jesus brings forward this idea that you cannot serve both God and money. Now, this is an all or nothing proposition here, isn't it? Jesus is saying that this life that we're enjoying is that serious, that he's saying, don't get caught up in thinking that you can do both, because someone is going to have your ultimate attention. Now, in the serving of God, you become a steward of resources, and He gives them to you to enjoy. There's no apology for going out and doing well and making money and enjoying the all that comes. I'm sitting here in a resort, and I'm enjoying a week of vacation with my bride, right? Enjoying our time together. Um, but I am also still mindful that one day I'm going to stand before God and give an account for the way in which I lived out this life. And if I'm just chasing after the resources rather than the one who gives those resources, don't you see, I put myself in a very precarious situation. It's interesting to me how stewardship then, it begins to really reveal our values. Is this all about me, or is it all about Him? And stewardship then determines our choices. What are those choices that we're going to make in our life? How are we going to spend our time? How are you going to spend your money? How are you going to invest your talents? It's either could be on your agenda, or it's going to be on God's agenda. But when we manage God's resources with an eternal perspective, meaning that one day we recognize that we're going to have to give an account to the one who has given us life and breath, when we manage God's resources as faithful stewards, then every day we're waking up, we're asking that question: is God pleased with the way in which I am living out my life today? When we manage God's resources, not only with an eternal perspective or as faithful stewards, now we're being asked in this text, are we managing God's resources with a singular devotion? Because He says here, listen, you can't serve two masters. You can't make money your primary ultimate, because if it does, it's going to pull you in all kinds of compromising ways. But He says, if you serve me, He says, I will bless you. I will give you strength. I will give you talents. I will open up doors of opportunity for you, because God knows I bless you. I'm going to bless everybody around you. I bless you. You're in a position now to help those less fortunate. So He says, God promises to bless the gift and the giver in ways that surpass one's imaginations. Can I just take a moment? And I rarely do this, but I just want to look back here. In 1727 is when Bethany Church first started. That's a long time ago, isn't it? It's a long time to be able to look back now and look at a history. And it wasn't always the best when you look back. There were periods when the church had lost sight of its mission. But since back around the early to mid 1900s, the church got back on its course, and now they had built new buildings right back in Greenland, and they celebrated back in the year 2000. Many of you know that as part of Bethany's history, one of those pilots, Tom McGinnis, that flew into the World Trade Center, was a member of Bethany Church, and his passing brought a lot of attention to Bethany during a very unsettling time for the country as a whole. And many people then began to start attending Bethany Church because of that. They were without a pastor at the time, and I came to Bethany as they were looking for a new pastor, and I started in March of 2003. So Greenland opens up these doors in the year 2000 in the new facilities where they currently are now. In 2011, we opened up Raymond, and it was a church that had dwindled down to less than 8 people. We They were going to close its doors, and we looked and we found that we had about 236 families that were traveling within a 10-mile radius of that church in Raymond. And so we decided that we would take over that building, and that began a whole nother trajectory for this whole community. And we've been there since 2011. In Kittery Point, we began this new work in 2018 in the same scenario. The church had dwindled down to about 4 people. I don't know if you have noticed, but this past week when they were talking about the they were reflecting on the primaries, and they talked about, they were drawing these contrasts between Iowa and New Hampshire, and when they spoke about New Hampshire, they said that New Hampshire as a state is not particularly religious, and that's true, right? We're one of the least church attended states in the whole country, and yet here Bethany Church has enjoyed an opportunity not only to grow its Greenland campus, but its Raymond campus and Kittery Point, 2 other churches that would have been closed, and now we're serving other sectors of our community as a whole. In each instance, the lighthouse was built for the Lord, a faithful testimony to the community that God is still on the throne, that God is not dead. It's a message that we get to communicate every day, that we're doing ministry in those communities. So even though we're surrounded by spiritual darkness, our light shines bright. It's an understatement, but it deserves being said, and not to be braggadocious. We're talking about managing God's resources in a way that honors God. We're talking about making sure that we're seeking after his kingdom, right? That we don't buy into a definition that the man who dies with the most toys wins. Rather, it's what Jesus is saying to us when he says a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions, but we ought to be rich towards God, seeking first that kingdom. And because you cannot serve 2 masters, you'll either love the one and despise the other. But when I look back now at Bethany's history, thousands of men and women, young and senior, have deepened their faith under Bethany's banner. Tens of thousands have gathered to hear the life-changing news of Jesus. Through Bethany Church, that have been staffed and funded, both in terms of treasure, like money, but also by people's time and their talents. We have become God's stewards. And if you've been a part of Bethany for any period of time, you know, hey, we feed the hungry, we give drink to the thirsty, we invite the stranger in and clothe the poor, we visit the sick, and by God's grace and power, we break the chains that enslave us. And how do we do that? By just offering them the good news of Jesus, who promises to forgive us our sins and to begin to delineate this path that we are to follow. It is liberating. Bethany Church, staffed and funded by its members here, our youth are discipled, and marriages are strengthened, and the grieving are comforted, the souls of men are fed, and sinners are welcomed home. Church was always meant to be not a hotel for saints, but a hospital for sinners. We're here to come alongside and help one another lest we lose our way. And the only way to make certain that we're going to be finishing this work is if we keep our eyes on him, if we seek first his kingdom. So what I'm saying to you is what really God has done as a result of people making a decision to have a priority where they are seeking God's kingdom first. Bethany Church, God's name is given glory around the world. Through everyone's joint efforts, we join hands with organizations like Child Voice International, who helped to house and heal young women scarred by violence and sexual mistreatment due to the ravages of war in Uganda. We join hands with Manna Ministries in India and with Help for Haiti, who feed and pray for and love on orphan children. We've joined hands with strategic partnerships in Ethiopia, Romania, Costa Rica, Mexico, Bolivia. See, as we manage God's assets with an eternal perspective, as good stewards with singular devotion, we take hold of the life that is truly life. And it is the only investment that is going to yield eternal dividends. See, my friends, we're talking about a life now that is worth living. While we can appreciate all the good things that God gives into our life, we can't make them the ultimate. We got to keep our eyes fixed on Him and run with endurance this race of faith. Can I end my time with you this morning by just referring to two passages for you? If you want to write them down, you could look at them up again at your convenience. But I just want you to think, for instance, in the book of Joshua in chapter 24, in verse 15. Joshua is now coming to an end of his life. Joshua was used by God to bring the nation of Israel into this promised land. And look what he says here in verses 14 and 15. He says, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. See, this message never changes. It's always the same. And that's why the world is always in contention between the children of the world and the children of the light. What does he say? He says, throw away the gods your forefathers worshiped, right? And serve the Lord. You can see how you can't serve both. You're going to serve one or the other. He says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your forefathers, right, in whose land you're living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Joshua was blessed of God. You never hear any bad backlash against Joshua. There are numerous individuals in the scriptures who've fallen away, right? They started off, great, and they didn't wind up so great. But not Joshua. He was faithful to the end. And here's one other passage. It's found in 1 John, all the way near the end of your New Testament. In chapter 2, verse 15 and 16, listen to these words. It says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, and notice the definition now that's given, the cravings of sinful men, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. My friends, if we manage God's resources with this eternal perspective, as a faithful steward, with a singular devotion, this is a promise that we can lean on. The man who does the will of God will live forever. That's a promise, as much as the promise of that sun rising every day, and the regularity of that. I pray that you go out today, seize the day, and remember that God is good all the time. Appreciate you joining me this Thursday, January the 25th. And Lord willing, we'll conclude our week tomorrow. Tomorrow I fly out, but I fly out later in the day, so we'll still do our morning devotion before I get on the plane. God bless you, my friends.